The reason why we wanted to do this webinar is because we see a lot of maps that, although they're already good, they could definitely be better. And we do realize that Kumu, especially for new users, can be a bit overwhelming because it requires you to do all the thinking of what you want your map to look like yourself. Unfortunately, there's no button that says make my map look good. And if you click it, then everything will just look beautiful. So you really have to think for yourself, what do I want it to look like? And that also ties in with what is the story that I'm trying to tell. Today, I'll be going through a couple of examples, both maps that already exist and how I think they could be better, but also we're going to create a map from scratch and see how I go through the process of making it look good. And what's funny about map design is that I usually take the exact same steps for each map that I design. So even though it might seem a little bit overwhelming to wonder how a map came about or how it came to look the way that it's looking, but if you stick to the steps of Kumu map design, then you'll usually end up with a pretty good idea of what that map can look like. And of course, there's very many different variations of what a map can look like. But if you stick to these steps, you can always get to some point that you think is good for your specific case. Also, before I dive in, I just want to let you know that you can also always send us an email and say, this is as far as I can take this map. Can you take a look and see if there's anything that can be better? Our support is always happy to help. And yeah, I definitely encourage reaching out if you feel like we're stuck in Kumu map design. Initially, when you're starting a Kumu map, I recommend also to look at this documentation, the first steps, especially if you've never created Kumu maps before. This brings you through the whole the whole first steps on how to create a Kumu map in really the most basic way. And it also explains a little bit about the words that we're using, like the terms that we're using for the entities on the map, and all the different options that you have available to design your map. So definitely always take a look here if you haven't ever created a map before. First example that I want to get into is this one. And before I do, I just want to make a disclaimer that these maps are actually designed by Kumu users. By no means does it mean that these are bad maps or that there's anything wrong with them. Not at all. These are just maps that we've came across and we felt like, hey, this could have been better visualized. So it says nothing about the data, but we just want to give some tips and tricks on how to make the overall map look better, and which also helps you tell your story and get your point across to your viewers. So the first one is this one. And when we open up the map, it's quite zoomed in. So let's click Zoom Fit here on the right-hand side. This is the map as it was created. It's a stakeholder mapping for a bunch of organizations in all these countries on the African continent, as you can see in the legend. A couple of things that I immediately noticed. The first thing is that there's no map description. So I have no idea what I'm looking at. I don't really know anything about the data. If I'm not familiar with Kumu, I also don't really know how to navigate this Kumu map. Secondly, when I look at the legend, there's a lot of different colors. And what's especially difficult is that it's challenging to distinguish which color belongs to which country. Because, for example, the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the first 5 colors are all different shades of purple. Of course, when you're looking at this larger map, it's very hard to distinguish between all of these slightly different colors. Those are the first 2 things. And the third thing is that this map is so large and there's so many connections that it's very hard to distinguish what I'm actually looking at. Are these people or these organizations? So I would have to zoom in a little bit more. And when I do zoom in, it actually becomes this tangled spaghetti of all these different connections. A lot of labels are overlapping. Some labels are larger. So here I can easily read MasterCard Foundation, but here these smaller ones I can't really read. Altogether, yeah, there's just a lot to be improved on this map. So let's go through a few things that I would do here. Like I said before, I would first include a map description. So when you click on this little edit pencil, you can write anything here about this map. And what you can also do is style this text a little bit with something called Markdown. And again, there's a specific documentation for Markdown. Yeah, the Markdown guide. But if you go back to the description, for example, if I put this here, this hashtag makes it a title. And then I can say something like this map looks at organizations. And I'll show you a couple of examples as well later of finished map descriptions that I think are very powerful. But yeah, so first I would update the map description. The second thing that I would do here is update the legend. As we can see, there's way too many colors. There's too many shades of similar colors, and it's just very hard to distinguish what is what. As a general rule of thumb, when you're making a Kumu map, if any categories has more than 13 colors, we recommend to not actually use coloring for that category. So when you're using coloring in the legends, let's try to stay under 13 different colors. And we've actually built that in a little bit, because if you're looking here at the color by and you click on country, for example, there's a couple of different color schemes that you can choose from here. And actually the one that has the most different options is set 2 and set 3. And they even already have only 13 colors. So it's not possible to show more than 13 colors on any color scheme in Kumu. And these different legend items have been made by hand. That's why they still show here. But you can see here that this is the color Neon 2. And if I make it into set 3, I can see that there's a couple more options that are about to pop up. There you go. But yeah, we always stick to max 13. So then you ask, what am I supposed to do when I have a lot of different categories and I do still want to distinguish between them? What I would do in this case, instead of using coloring, is I would use controls. And I'm going to dive way deeper into what controls do, but basically they are buttons that you add to your map that allow you to either filter or showcase or focus different parts of your map. So basically you're highlighting parts of your map and you're fading away or hiding the rest of it. And that way I can say, okay, let's say I want to see only the organizations that operate in Algeria. Then the rest of the map fades out and I'll only be looking at Algeria, but I won't have to look for that specific purple color. And you'll see that coming back in a lot of maps, because to me, controls are really a key feature within Kumu to make maps easier to digest. Another thing that I would do is probably make all the labels the same size. So in this case, they're being scaled by a certain number, which makes some fonts bigger because the element is bigger, and some fonts smaller because the element is smaller. And there's a way to work around that, which we also have a doc for. How do I control label size while scaling element size so that you can have that built in? And of course, for another map where you're not scaling, what you can also simply do is change your element size. For example, if I type here font size, and then I can make it 100, and then yeah, that will just change all my fonts to the same. In this case, there's just so much data. So of course, I can choose to do something that's called remove overlap, which is when you click on the O key on your keyboard, it removes the overlap between a lot of your elements. So you can see that all the elements just jumped a little bit, and then I can choose to pin these elements in place. But the reason why I'm not doing that here is just because there's so many elements anyways that I don't really think that when you're looking at this map that you're going to be really going into each and every element that you see here. It's far more likely that you come onto this map and you're only looking at organizations in a specific region. So when you have that region filtered out, then it will already reduce the map a lot, and it'll already be easier to interpret because all of the noise within quotation marks that's not relevant to you at that moment is simply not there. Then the second one, it's funny because this is actually a map that is in our gallery. So we do use it a lot to showcase Kumu's capabilities. But what always kind of bothers me about this map is that there's so much data, but it's not easy to find that data to go through what is all, like what it contains, what is in here. So what this map has done really well is that for the legends, it's very simple. There's people and there's organizations, no mistake about it. What they also did really well is that they use different, very distinct colors for person and organization. So even while being zoomed out like this, it's very clear to see who the people are and who the organizations are. The side note, while you're looking at this map, you can constantly see it rearranging itself. And if I click on the space bar on my keyboard, that stops, because sometimes I find that jumbling a bit annoying because it distracts you. So yeah, back to the main part. You can also see a great map description here. There's a welcome and a little information that the map is no longer being updated, some instructions on how to use the map. I always like to put that in maps myself as well, for viewers that aren't familiar with Kumu. And then some information on what else to do if you're interested in finding out more information. So really, the only thing that I would improve about this map is adding controls again. Obviously, we're looking at people and organization, but let's say that I'm not familiar with this ecosystem yet, then I would have to zoom in a lot to see who is on there. And all of these names, I don't know that they're on there, so I would have to like really be going through the whole map like one by one. And also the search bar, though, is very useful if you already know the ecosystem because you can simply search for what you're looking for. It's not useful when I don't know the ecosystem yet because I don't know what I'm looking for yet or who I'm trying to find here yet. So in this case, I would again go into controls. So here, if you open the basic editor and click add custom control, you can click here and there's 4 different options. Well, 5 by now. We're also going to do a separate webinar specifically about controls and what they do and also how to make more advanced controls. But basically, you can choose here in the first dropdown if you want to filter, so you hide the rest of the map. If you want to showcase, which is fading out the rest of the map. If you want to cluster, so you're connecting elements by information in their profiles, or if you want to focus it. And when you focus, you zoom in on elements that have certain profile fields, including their first degree connections. So that's also really nice if you want to see who the neighboring connections are of the elements that you're focused on. The second option is the region. So am I going to put the buttons at the bottom, or do I want them to be at the top left, anywhere I want them to be? In this case, we're filtering by element type, but you can filter by any other field as well. And this last button is the aesthetic of what the button looks like. So it can be a button, a label. A label is a bit more simple, or it can be a drop down. And the drop down I usually use when there's a lot of different options. So of course you don't want to have too many buttons in your map. So in that case, I would use drop down, and you can even use a placeholder. And this is very useful as well, because here you can, again, instruct your viewers what will happen if they click this button. So I can, for example, name this control, what can I help you with? Well, these big maps take some time to load. But yeah, what can I help you with? And now you can see that at the bottom of the map. And that immediately prompts someone, hey, what can I help you with? If I click on it, I can choose anything that is on the map. But let's go back to the buttons. And if I click here, for example, on organization, now that filters out the rest of the map. So I'm only looking at the organizations. But what I would actually do in this map, because I already knew that the organizations were red, so I could already find them. What I would do here is actually create a control that mentions the label. And of course, this is going to be a lot of different options, as you can see here, which just doesn't look great. So in this case, I'll definitely use a dropdown. But what's useful about this dropdown is that I can now really see anyone that's on the map. And the only thing I have to do is click on them, and then I can easily find them here. So that might be an option just to get this huge list. So now you have the visualization, but you also have the list view. And if I click on any of these, it brings me straight to the organization called Blue Avocado. Where are you? There you are. And that way I can, see all of the information that's in the map. So that's just a very simple explanation of how to make something a little bit better, even though this was already a pretty great map. This is a network, obviously. It's a network of people. It's a network of people working in politics. Even though what this user did great is adding images, which makes it feel more alive. We're actually looking at people, and it immediately gives me an idea of who this person is. But still, it just kind of feels a bit all over the place, and I see a lot of connections, and I see overlapping elements. So this was definitely one of those maps that I looked at the first time, and I felt, okay, especially for such an important topic as politics, this can maybe speak a little bit more and tell more of the story. Again, we're seeing that the map description is empty, so always good to keep an eye on that. In this case, there's also no legend. So I see a lot of colors, but I don't really know what they mean. There's also sizing going on. Of course, some elements are bigger than others, which is great because I love it when people play around with sizing. I don't really know what that means here. Another thing is the layout. So there's multiple types of layout. The first one is force directed, where Kumu decides where it wants to place the elements. The other one is the fixed layout, and with the fixed layout, you decide where you want to place the elements, so you can literally pick them up and drop them somewhere. If you pin them in place, they stay in that exact same place. And there's really multiple options for when the force directed or the fixed layout is better. I like force directed when there's just a lot of data. Like, why would I be doing that? Why would I be placing them manually? So, for example, like the Austin map that we were just looking at, this is so much data. I don't want to place these manually somewhere. So I'm just going to have Kumu decide where it goes. And what's also useful about that is that Kumu automatically puts all the people that are more connected, so that have more connections to other elements, put them in the middle. And the outside, the periphery, has people and organizations, elements that are lesser connected. So I can also immediately see, okay, this person that's here in the middle, they have a lot of connections. So I know that that's someone that if I want to reach the network, might have to reach out to. So that's the force directed, and it can be very useful when there's a lot of data. But in this case, there's not really a lot of data. So I think I can make this look a little bit nicer and also make it easier to follow the connections, because now some connections are kind of hidden behind elements, and other elements are just off to the side, and I don't really see the connection between the rest of the network. So what I would do here is, of course, like I said, you can snap them to a certain place. So if you click on an element and then click on pin, you can keep them there. So what I, for example, could do is I could place this one a little bit more there, pin that one in place, and then this one more here, pin that one in place too. And that way you can kind of play around with the whole map. You can still see that Kumu is trying to rearrange the rest of the map based on the force-directed layout, because it's also possible to only pin a few key elements and keep the rest force-directed, because that sometimes creates this nice automatic structure as well. But if I want to pin all of the elements in place, what I would do is I click A on my keyboard, which selects all of the elements and all the connections. I can see here what's on the map now. And if I click pin in place here now, then it simply pins all the elements. And now I can really one by one, you'll see that the rest of the map doesn't move anymore, because all the elements now really stay in the place where I want them to be. However, for this map, still didn't like that as much, because I didn't want to think too much about where to place the element. So I'm actually going to do something, it's called snapping to a certain shape. So if I go to the setting here on the right-hand side, and then I clicked on more here under structure, you can go to snap to. And snap to is either that you snap something to a circle or to a line. So first I'm going to add a rule so that Kumu knows what I want to snap to the circle. So Kumu already shows me what that is kind of going to look like. The connections don't move until I save it, but for now, it just looks like this. And if I want to edit that, I can look here behind the edit pencil. There's a little menu. The first thing that I can do is I can decide what I actually want to be in a circle, because sometimes you'll want multiple concentric circles. So then you can tell Kumu by way of rules what different circles you want. So for example, I can say anyone with the element type that is person, I want them to be, I want to use this selector. In this case, there's not much information in the map, but that's how you would create kind of subcategories to create circles out of. But in this case, I'm just going to stick to all the elements that are here in place. And then they're kind of spaced out, like they're very dense. So I'm going to make this space between the elements a little bit bigger. So like this. And what that immediately does is that it opens up the connections now as well. It's much clearer to see kind of how the connections are going and where they're going. And what's really neat too is that if I now hover over a certain element, I can immediately see what that element's connections are. It's a little bit easier than when they were all jumbled together. And then of course, I would add a legend here. So I wonder why this map is not showing a legend. I think that the creator of the map manually took it out because they didn't want to show it. But usually the legend gets created automatically when you pick a color here in a color scheme, like we've done in other maps. But that's definitely something that I would bring back here, because if I look here, I can see that they're sizing by influence, which is important for me to know, because now I can easily see that this person, which is the president, I'm sure he is one of the most influential people. So yeah, that type of information would be useful. And what you can also do is sort the elements a little bit more. What I'm going to do now is actually snap to in another way. What I just did is snapping automatically. So I tell Kumu that I want to snap to a circle and Kumu does it for me. Another way to do it is by simply selecting elements on your map. So I'll A again on my keyboard, and then I will right click on the map and I will choose snap to. And I can say snap to a circle. And in this case, I can actually make the circle larger or smaller simply by scrolling. So yeah, there's a little bit more control over how much space I want there to be. And if you again right click, you can say sort by. And in this case, I think I want to sort by influence because that's what's dictating the size of the elements. So now you really see this full circle of immediately seeing, okay, who are the most influential people and where are all their connections going? And then it keeps going to smaller and smaller up to the people that actually have no influence, which you can also see because there's less and less connections the more you move through the circle. So that's pretty neat too. And then, of course, once you have this, always make sure to hit enter to save it and also make sure that your elements are pinned. So that's what I would do for this map here. Again, add map description, add a legend, and I would have, put this into a circle like this. Then another map that I like to showcase is actually one of our own, the Projects in the Wild. Projects in the Wild is really an awesome map because it shows all of these different example projects that we've came across, what we call in the wild. So yeah, whenever we see a Kumu map and we just think, wow, this is really cool, we put them in here. And of course, there's a lot of data here, and this map is only going to keep growing. So in this case, we thought it was really important to include all of the information that I just mentioned. So first, there's a map description, Projects in the Wild, our logo. It explains how to use this map, and it also gives some commonly requested examples. So if you hover here over the org chart, you can immediately find this element on the map. And this is called a widget. If you're in the docs and you go to the overview all the way at the bottom where at the W, yep, there we go. Widgets explains how to make those overviews in the map description. And I always like them because you can kind of highlight some parts of your map. In this case, we wanted to, put out here some commonly requested examples or some tags that we really love. So yeah, the map description's here. And then what you can see in this map is that there's a lot of different controls. I'm actually going to close this so that we have a full overview. If we're counting, we're seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 different controls. And sometimes that can feel a little bit overwhelming. In this case, we felt like all of this information is really relevant just because there's so many different types of Kumu maps and you can categorize them in so many different ways. But it's always good to think for yourself, how many controls is enough? How many is too much? How am I overwhelming my viewer? So for example, in this specific map, we could have potentially taken out the years because people might care a little bit less about the years. And we could have also downsized this one, so not include languages. But just because we want this to be very comprehensive, we have all those controls. But that's always a good thing to think about, like what is too much? Maybe I should let people explore a little bit more on their own. What I like about this map is that we have a cluster control. So again, clustering is that when you click on the field that you want to cluster by, that Kumu creates connections between all these elements based on the information in the profile. So if I want to see what the creators are in this map, which maps they have created, then I simply click here, and that adds in all these little icons. And again, icons is also something that I like to use just because it's now really easy to see what is a project and what is a person that made that project. Because if we all stick to circles, then it's harder to distinguish between what's a project and what's a user. So in this case, I can easily see that, hey, Jeff, our CEO, has created all these maps. You can also see that any map that has a star was created by the Kumu team. So that's how you can kind of play around with icons and add an extra dimension to your map. And what was really important to us in this cluster control is that you're not able to cluster by multiple fields at the same time. The reason why is because the more fields you're clustering by, the more interconnected your network is going to be, and the more it becomes just a hairball, a spaghetti of different connections. So if I click now on Kumu features, we're going to switch from the user icons into these little tool icons, which indicates a certain feature. And as you can see already, there's already so many Kumu features here that this is already quite overwhelming. It's actually easier to just go to the Kumu features dropdown and look for sizing elements or any other feature that you like to see. Well, we just added both options. Again, is it necessary? Not really. We just want to show off what Kumu can do. Lastly, what I want to show here is if you look through the theme, in this case, it's a drop down because there's so many options. But I feel like there's way too many options here. So sometimes making a map look better is also really about the data structure, because these different themes, they can probably be brought down to 10 bigger buckets. Especially if you look here, like biocredits, biodiversity, biology, biomimicry, all of that can probably go into one category that's biology. And then those maps will be, categorized a little bit better, and it will feel less overwhelming. How much do I want to drill down into the categories, or maybe do I want to generalize it a bit more? But also sometimes it's too general. So you might want to go deeper into the data and create multiple different categories just to make it visually look better. Again, that's a little bit of a trade-off, or more like a decision that you would have to make. And then lastly, this legend, these colors were chosen specifically because they're what's called accessible color scheme. So people that have difficulties seeing the difference between different shades of a certain color, it's easier for them to see that these are different colors than if you have, very similar colors or different shades of the same color. So definitely always something to keep in mind, that we also keep maps accessible to everyone that is viewing them. This one I found pretty interesting because this user has actually already played around a lot with the visualizations themselves. Again, you see this constant moving because Kumu is trying to place the elements. So I'm going to stop that again. Here they have, very minimal map description, and I'm not really sure what I'm looking at here. But if I click here on the different view, and these different views you can basically use to create, look at your data from different angles and also decorate it in different ways. But this already makes it look, a lot different, because now I can see, okay, there's these categories. I'm not sure yet what they mean, so that would have been great to put in the map description, but at least now I can see the differences between them, and not just in colors, but in this case also in shapes. So you have the triangles, the circles, all of that to play around with. And if you go through all of these views, you see that they've just tried a lot of different things. So this is the different color scheme, coloring specifically by ECTS, which is the amount of points that you're getting for a certain course. These connections here, yet another color. And then this one is what they chose as a final, this is what their final map looked like. Which again is interesting because you see that these colors are a little bit more difficult to distinguish. So though I think it visually looks really cool, it might be a little harder to interpret. And I also really like this view because they've used snap to a line. So they didn't snap to a circle, they snapped to a line, and then they aligned these elements so that it actually looks as, as a square. Here, this is called an SNA dashboard. So an SNA dashboard, it is a social network analysis dashboard. So this shows the number of elements and the number of connections. But you can actually add the metrics to them so that you can see like what the density is of your network and any other metric. And if you go here to the docs and search for SNA dashboard, you can actually see what that looks like. And also you can see how to include here. There's actually a lot of different ones that you can have, but to create it and all of the different options that you can put in or leave out. And what's actually really neat about the dashboard is that it updates based on any filters that you're using at the moment. So if I click on architecture, that immediately updates this number as well. So that in every view, you can always have an updated overview of what that specific view looks like. So basically, this is an overview of, it's called the fruit map, but it's more like a food map because it shows all these different food items. But if I look at the table here, in the bottom right corner, you can click on the table icon. And that's basically a back-end representation of what your map looks like. You see here the label, so all of the food items that are included, the element type, so whether they're a fruit or a vegetable or a protein, a nut, a seed, etc. Tags in this case are the benefits for your health. So like, okay, apples are good for low blood pressure, reduce the risk of heart disease and stroke. So in this case, I guess the main story that I'm trying to tell with this map is not the types of food that exist, because a lot of people obviously know that, but what types of foods should I eat when I want to become healthier? So with that in mind, I can start decorating. And what I always say is first get your data into your Kumu map, before you start worrying about visualizations. Because some people like put a little bit of data in and then they're visualizing and then they want to put new data in and then they might get confused. So I always really separate those two parts of the process. I first get my data in and then I can start playing around, because a lot of the data that we're decorating based on fields inside of the profiles. But I first look at my data structure like I just did. So, okay, we have 3 different fields that I'm working with. Then I open up the basic editor and I think, okay, what do I want to start coloring by? In this case, I think I want to color by element type. Here you see in the legend, you see person and organization, which is odd because we don't have people or organizations in this map. It's actually something that the stakeholder template, which we're using here, uses by default. But I do want to take them out. So I'll click here in the top left corner. I'll click on fields. I'll click on element type. And then I simply take away person and organization. But I do have to reload the map now. I'll take a moment, and I haven't saved my decoration yet. So as this map opens up again, it won't be showing any colors. I'll have to bring that back. Okay, so we're coloring by element type again. And now I can see that these are the only options that we have. I can kind of think which color do I like. I did kind of like these colors, so I'm going to stick to this one. And just for the sake of editing, now that I'm working in it, I actually want to see a little bit better what labels there are in this map. So I'm going to change the font size. It's already at 100, so I'll have to do that in the advanced editor. So I'll say for all elements, I want the font size to be 200. Okay, so now at least I can see what I'm working with, and I might even click O on my keyboard just to make sure that they don't overlap. Then, so I've colored by element type now. So because element type is a single value field, it only colored the inside of the element. However, if you're coloring by a multiple value field, so an element can belong to one or multiple categories, it actually creates something that we call flags. So if I switch this coloring schemes to tags, I'll see that everything turns back gray, but now I have these little flags that are around my element, and they also connect with, with this new legend that I have here. That for me is a decision. Like, do I want to color the inside or do I want to color the tags? Again, right now we don't have that many tags, but if there's more than 13 tags, it's an easy decision. I only want to color the inside. You can even use both. So I can say here, I want to color just the inside, but then in the advanced editor, and we have a guide for how to do this. If you simply go to decorations and then click flags, find the code on how to do this right here. I can say I want to flag by tags with set 3. And that actually now I have both. Some people might say, okay, but this is too many colors. Now I can't really distinguish between what is what. You can see here that there's now a lot more options, but just wanted to show that that's possible. Then I'm starting to look at the structure. Do I want to connect by certain information? Let's just see if I like what that looks like. So, and this is really, even after 5 years of making Kumu maps, this is what I do. I just kind of press things and see what it looks like, and if I like it or not, because it's really so different per map. Okay, so what is happening here is that all these elements, they have very overlapping tags. So it all just becomes this ball of spaghetti in the center, and there's a lot of connections, and I don't really see what is going where. So in this case, I'm going to say no to tags, to connecting by tags. You can also choose to filter certain information, so take out certain information. And again, I can choose to snap to. But what I actually want to do in this map is add controls again. So when I use the controls here, I'll say showcase elements. I'll place them at the top, and I'll say by tags. Again, this is quite a lot of buttons, so I'm going to make it a drop down. In this case, I chose showcase, which fades away the rest of the map, but highlights what I want to see. I'm going to call the placeholder health benefit. Okay, so yeah, now I can easily see, okay, what do I want to do? I want to boost metabolism, and that immediately which elements do that. It's pretty funny because they're all protein in this case, but of course, if you choose another one, lower blood pressure, you can also get like all these different colors. Okay, so now that I've added controls and I've added a legend, I'm going to look at the layout. Even though these labels are not overlapping at the moment, I don't really like, what they look like. So again, of course, we can snap to a circle, but what we can also do is make certain regions on the map itself. And in this case, I have to do that manually because Kumu doesn't allow you to create regions automatically based on information in the profile. What I can do is I can click one element and then hold shift on my keyboard and then click the other elements, and that kind of selects them all. But of course, if you have a lot of elements, that's quite tedious. So what I can also do is click here on search and then click this rocket icon, and I can say I want all element types that are, in this case, I was looking at protein. Protein is misspelled, but we'll just skip past that. Now I have 15 elements, so I use this selector, and that now has all these selected. I would drag all of these off to the side to create a bit more space, and then I would manually make them be just a little bit closer, and then pin them in place. So yeah, again, this is still quite manual work. It's a little bit tedious. So this is one way to go about it. And of course, the second way, which I explained earlier, is to create concentric circles. Then I would fill out the map description. And I usually just, like I said, use the standard template of the one that I showed here. Just what is it? So a little introduction. How can I use this map to explain to the viewers how they use it? And then maybe like a list widget that lists some information on the map. And then the last thing, what I always like to do is, especially if I have a story that I want to tell, if I have a point that I want to get across, or I want to persuade people, is to make a presentation after. So if you click on the menu in the top left corner, you can choose presentations, and you can say create your first presentation. Kind of like in PowerPoint, you just create each slide, with the difference that these slides actually have an interactive Kumu map in them. And what's really cool about the presentation is that it allows for a lot more narrative. So for example, this Kumu map, even though I go through a lot of different views, this map description on the left stays the same. But let's say that each view actually deserves their separate description. Then I would create a presentation. This is my map. And then I can, for example, first go through all the fruits. And then on my second slide, I will go through all the protein. And the third slide, I'll go through all the seeds. But every time that I do, I can add fruits are healthy. You can add some more narrative, and eventually you have this presentation that really pulls you through the whole map, that eventually can result in something like this. And what I think is really great about presentations is that it really untangles the map. So even the most dense map with so many different categories and different data points, you can make a lot easier by creating a presentation out of it. So this is a systems map that first shows the whole system. They did great with coloring here, very distinct colors. I can easily see what is what. And what I like is that they start with what is the systems thinking practice. So they really explain for someone unfamiliar with Kumu or unfamiliar with systems thinking what we're about to see. And then you can go through this whole map in, presentation. And they start with the cycle of trauma, and then they go through the whole map. And that's just great for storytelling, and definitely great for map design to eventually get where you want your map to be. Yeah, so you have two different shapes that you can snap to. The first one is a circle, and the second one is a line. I definitely don't see a lot of maps that use lines, just because usually your map gets really long or gets really high. That's why, yeah, circles are nice, because they just really center right onto the map. And I would say that it's maybe like 20% of the maps that I'm working with that I actually snap to a certain shape, because I usually just like the way that Kumu organizes the data, simply because it's sometimes the point of it is that it shows the complexity. So a map that, for example, if we're looking at this is one that I always like to use. It looks like a super complex map, even though it only has a couple of elements. There's so many connections. And sometimes it's the exact point that you're trying to get across. We're looking at a very highly interconnected network or community. We're looking at a very, dense network. And let's untangle that by looking at controls and by looking at colors. So sometimes I just like to keep that chaos. In this case, I find this is a very good example of the of using Snap 2, because if we're focusing more on the connections between the elements than the elements itself, then I like to use this because it's easier to follow the connections. And again, this one is also pretty dense in some areas, but if I hover over an element, highlights what other elements it's connected to. So I like to use this one if there's really more emphasis on the connections than there is on the elements, because it's easier to filter out elements with controls than it is to do that for connections, because usually most of the information is in the elements. So that's maybe a case where I would say, like, I use Snap 2. This is basically called grouping, and these larger the light gray elements in the background, they are supposed to indicate that these are certain subsystems. However, Kumu doesn't make it easy yet to do this automatically. So what was done here, it's a larger element in the background that was made into a huge size. So this was not done automatically. And then lastly, how Kumu orders certain elements is that smaller elements always go on top of elements. So it's really all about pinning these smaller elements in place and then just dragging the large elements behind it.